And I'm trying to make it as entertaining as possible so you don't miss anything if you don't have a chance to go to the movie theater tonight. It's fantastic that InCITE Gallery is organizing these exhibitions and lectures and workshops, and it's actually known way abroad, India. A couple of friends in our generation came here to show their work. It's an institution, it's become an institution that we really know internationally. So thank you so much for inviting our office to show the work, to discuss this. Thanks so much for the Juergen Institute to being on board and partner with InCITE. And it's of course wonderful to have the Consul General from Germany also being a great supporter of this exhibition. Two more excellences here. Nice to have you here. Thank you, Canada and France, that you're also joining us. And to everybody else, I'm showing a lot of images, and I'm showing work that ranges really from small scale to large scale projects. They're not really chronological, they go from installation work and design to urban interventions. I will finish with Metaphor Parasol because it really became a very vibrant project, somehow an icon for what digital design can do to architecture of today and how it also gets kind of appropriated by the people. My interest in architecture came, let's say, from an obsession of pushing the limits of what the material of architecture can be. It's not just built material like concrete or glass, it's also the digital and the virtual that's important and becomes part of what we have to kind of maneuver and use as material to think about spaces in our current moment and also, of course, into the future. Also, what you see in our work is not so much only about architecture, it really expands the discipline into art, design. We get feedback from all kinds of disciplines, which is a completely different discourse when you talk to artists or to design critics about maybe the same installation or the same project. So by kind of inviting also different disciplines to really talk about what this kind of constructed realities that we have around us, it's very fruitful. And one of the obsessions that kind of started to become a source material for our architecture are these patterns that you find on the inside of envelopes. It's somehow an interest in issues of privacy and public exposure, of intimacy and, again, exposure. It's something that is very crucial to a society that looks obsessed with data, and this becomes more and more important as we talk about data transparency and availability in the future. And maybe this is the last moment where it becomes still visible and materialized in these patterns that are enveloping private information inside an envelope versus a neutral outside. You all know these when you get your mail from the bank, or even when you get a printout or your PIN number. It's this overlay of numbers and letters that are camouflaging private information behind. And as a building also has an envelope with a facade, inside more contained, outside public. It's the same thing here in a small object. And we use these patterns somehow as a reference, as a metaphor to deal with these issues and to occupy these patterns, enlarge them, make them into a space in itself, inhabiting basically this structure or this membrane between these two conditions, inside, outside, private, public, discrete, indiscrete, concealed, exposed. There's a collection, and it's very easy to collect them because they come to your house every day, a collection of all kinds of patterns, from camouflage patterns to sometimes just very graphic lines, company logos. I think I'm too far away for this thing. These are just names of cities. Again, very organic camouflage patterns, company logos. All that happens inside of the envelope because if it's closed and you hold it against the light, you could read what's written on the letter. But with the patterns, it camouflages these patterns. And somehow it's also something very related to, let's say, information technology and administration, and very German. My research goes back to around 1900 in a German printing house, Berthold, in Berlin. They invented or were very important in developing these patterns, mostly to make office administration more efficient. The younger ones might not remember, but there were typewriters at one point, and a paper and a carbon paper in between, and a paper and a carbon paper. So you could write invoice and the shipping slip at the same time. But sometimes you have to block out or erase information. So when you print the value of an object that is delivered into these patterns with a typewriter in the copy, you cannot read it. So it was an information control device, somehow to allow certain information to be read and not to be read. Again, all of this somehow as a reference to what we deal today with in an invisible way in the virtual world, how to actually allow certain information to get to reach certain information or to block certain information. So the work somehow takes this material and enlarges it, sometimes very literally, and sometimes more as a reference. But what you see from now on is trying to find a new form, a space that's contemporary, dealing with exactly these issues in kind of innovative constructions. This one here is an art gallery in Berlin, the Berlin State Gallery, called British Gallery, and we designed a space that actually took these patterns, found patterns, enlarged them, here printed on a carpet, and make it into an inverse envelope somehow. So it was acoustically interesting because the carpet took all that sound, but to have your body relationship with these numbers was quite interesting. But more importantly were these little sculptures here, where we tried to do a three-dimensional, where we tried to read or interpret these patterns into a three-dimensional structure. And you see here three images of the same cube. One is a pattern, and when you look at it from one side, you can still read 7, 5, 0, 9, and so forth. But once you turn around a little bit, it becomes a three-dimensional skeleton. In this case, it's kind of layered and connected. There are different ways how to make 2D into 3D. Somehow this is one procedure. So, use this as a filter to read the project that I'm showing from here on. But it's somehow a study on spatial, certain spatial strategies that are fundamental in the underlying of the work that we're doing. This is for Autostadt. This is something not. I think I come closer to the computer. This is for Autostadt in Wolfsburg. Autostadt is the city where you go when you buy your Volkswagen. It's a whole themed city on different brands of Volkswagen, and they also have different exhibitions. Let's say one on design culture, one on share stakeholders. This one is about mobility and sustainability. And the competition we won is this 1,000 square meter exhibition that's constantly updated. But what we have as a starting point in the argument is there's a recycling triangle. That's kind of the first thing we remember when we talk about how to consume in a recycled or in a sustainable way. But by now we know that the whole idea of consuming, producing, moving in a, let's say, conscious way about the future is a much more, let's say, complex thing. It's a culture of uncertainty because every day we learn something new. Something that was good yesterday might be wrong tomorrow or the other way around. It's a whole network of different, let's say, dependencies, of dead-end roads. It's kind of an artificial forest of trials and error. And inside this whole pattern, we have embedded information. We work together with Art.com, which is a very famous, let's say, interface design company. And they did all the content development for these stations, which was all about getting really deep information on sustainability and mobility. So this is a spatial interpretation of this network of, let's say, relationships of multiple dependencies and so forth. There were artificial waterfalls. When you put in your hand, they create different words, different new forms of combinations. It's something that is, let's say, emotionally or atmospherically very easy to understand. But if you're really interested, you can go very deep into these different informations. There are about 2,000 to 3,000 visitors every day, so it's really easy. A lot of people go there to pick up their car, or it's just incoming. educational ground for schools. In a larger scale, this is a dining hall in Karlsruhe for the university. It's an earlier project, but you can see similar ideas about the structure. Less complicated geometrically, but let's say more dramatic in terms of scale. Here we have a building that sits at the intersection between the campus of Karlsruhe and the forest which is behind. It's a building that has seating for its dining hall, that has seating here and the kitchen behind. I should go first. But the relationship between inside and outside is very important. It's a timber construction where we had to actually watch very closely to the costs. And we compared concrete with steel with timber, and always the timber was the one that was about a third the price of steel or concrete. But timber with a polyurethane coating, which makes it much easier in terms of maintenance and also construction. So everything was prefabricated, put on site in a very short time, and then sprayed on with a 3mm coating. This is a technology that we developed with the engineers. It's the first time that timber and polyurethane coating was actually realized. The coating makes it possible to really cover all surfaces. It's weather protecting. In that case, you don't need a metal flashing. You don't need certain areas to be protected in a different way where rain is actually falling on it. And we have a continuous sculptural skeleton inside and outside, somehow as you would consider it when you design it on a model. Here you have also, again, no metal flashing here, where the water hits it here. It's also one continuous surface. So wall, floor, ceiling, all come an envelope inside and outside. We are also working on a pavilion in Karlsruhe, another competition we won. There's a 300th anniversary this year, and behind the castle here in the park, there will be a pavilion for concerts, for exhibitions, for screenings. It will be a moment where the city celebrates itself. It was a very funny moment where we had to be super careful with the ground. But, everything is kind of nature protected in this garden. We were told to have very limited foundations, and there is huge screws in plastic that we could screw into the earth, and we would use them as temporary foundations. But when they started constructing it, they found after 1 meter all the rubbles from the Second World War. So the whole city, actually the whole garden actually is a dumping ground for rubble from the Second World War. So nothing about nature preserve. A totally different issue now with checking if there are no bombs still left in the garden. So construction and building is surprises every day. So some use also timber construction for next year. Here you see this is the tower of the castle down here, and behind in the garden we have the structure. So if you're all in Karlsruhe in June, come and join us. Another timber construction, I'm showing these timber projects here because Seville in the end kind of is based on the research and all the experiences that we developed with these buildings. This is the courthouse in Belgium. It's next to the train station, and in Europe, I guess maybe all over the world, all the cargo areas next to the train stations moved out to better, larger areas. And these city central neighborhoods became really valuable ground for development for the city. So you have a building that's the first one in a row of more buildings sitting on the plan of West 8, which is an urban planning company from Holland. And you have three parts of the building. One is like the courtrooms, one is the university part with the library for the law department, and then offices and the restaurant on top. Here you see again, there's a train station here. This whole development along the train tracks, this is our building here. And Hasselt, that's the town where the courthouse is built. Hasselt comes from hazelnut trees, that's the name. And in the logo, they have two hazelnut trees that are kind of embracing each other. And two, again, is something that shows that there's the beginning of the community. One tree would be a singular object. Two says it talks about a group. And the building somehow, again, takes as a metaphor. And it's interesting, when you look at Hasselt, there are always two towers from different periods that were essential for the development of Hasselt. There are two medieval towers, 2 towers, which was a technical town hall from the 20th century, and now this was the West 8 master plan, 2 high-rises for the new development. Again, 2 medieval towers, 2 20th century towers, and then 2 towers from the new development. We built one of them, actually one turned into a tower with the whole corridors. You see also the fillings, which is the sun protection, the double-layered facade, has a pattern, again, something that's based on patterns that we found that we thought were fitting the idea. And the building somehow references the hazelnut trees, or even when you think of old medieval towns in Europe, the central tree at the square of a village was the place where the city or where the village would gather. That's where justice was spoken, that's where people would discuss what's right and wrong. Again, a symbol for law and lawmaking. Some interior shots. There's a lovely courtrooms. The restaurant at the top. And again, a view from the train tracks. The landscaping here is done by Brazil. Not far from Hasselt is Düsseldorf, which is kind of maybe a couple hundred, about 100 kilometers or 50 away from it. And we are now involved in 2 projects, in 2 high-rise projects in Düsseldorf. One is in the very center, again next to the train area. This was the post area. And the other one is an old area for a hospital next to the Rhine Valley. So all this is the Rhine Valley here, and one is a high-rise for housing, and the other one is a high-rise for development. For one project, we wanted to do, again, something that's unique for the city, and people would recognize it easily, because it's on a 5-degree angle, and we compared it to other towers that are famous for being not straight. And that's why it's up there. I think this, the only one here is a little more tilted, but we wanted to do a 5-degree angle high-rise. And so this is where we are right now in the building zoning phase. We have a whole ring of buildings down here, and then the 2 rings actually moving out, creating this high-rise. It's very exciting because the whole master plan was this old post area. These 2 rings are developed by Leluc and myself from Vienna, with a small high-rise here. This ring here is our project with the high-rise sitting next to the train station. So very kind of famous, or let's say, it's kind of a building site that you find all over Europe next to the train stations. A lot of problems for this noise, how to develop, how to create somehow this former industrial feel of the site into a contemporary interpretation. And this is a view by night. When you jump to the other project we have here on the other side of the valley, this would be the high-rise that I just showed you. Here we have a housing project that is from here on housing, and the first 6 floors are all doctor's offices because it's next to the hospital. And what's important to know is, in an aging society like in Germany, these projects, these combinations become very popular because you might be able to stay in your apartment. In this case, we have some money, of course, but you just go downstairs to a doctor. If you are a little bit more sick, you go across the bridge to the hospital. So you can kind of stay in your neighborhood. You can be next to your neighbors. You don't have to leave your very local, let's say, friends or a neighborhood situation in different states of your health and your age level. So again, a market or a situation that's developing a lot in our European cultures. This is the building again. This is the hospital. More housing here. This is our building. This is the Rhine Valley. It becomes a facade that's very kind of fluid and light. And on one side we have a street that's quite noisy. So we hope that with the facade we can catch some of the noise. Again, a big issue in German architecture or building zone laws. Different types of apartments, from smaller to bigger ones, and this is all doctor's offices down here. It's like I don't know, maybe like a piece of fabric that's flying around the building, a top-down view. And it's something that we kind of took and made large and kind of developed further from a project that we just built in Berlin, which is an apartment building on a very, let's say, historically charged site. It's in the very center of Berlin on the Tacheles area, next to a Baroque building from, I don't know, I guess like the 18th century. This first one's a rendering. This is the building, the facade. We have kind of closed blocks in Berlin. That's a typical structure. Would be the line of the block, and there's always a front house with a side wing, and sometimes there's even a back house. In our case, we have a front house and a side wing, and the gardens are, what they say, the courts are very important as kind of recreational spaces in Berlin. They're quite green, usually they have big trees, and our idea was to take that idea of a, let's say, domestic landscape in the courtyard and make that part of the building. So here would be the court, this is the street, and somehow we jump or step the landscape up into the building, and also make little, let's say, landscape, domestic landscape inside, where you have in the living room this little sunken area which becomes the sofa and relaxation area. There are two courts to get up and down. These are the sunken areas located in each apartment, and they're different located from floor to floor. So you have this imprint from the upper floor apartment into yours. You would actually create an imprint somewhere else. But with this kind of stepping device, we were able to allow more height for the normal floor plans. The facade comes from, again, a concern with ideas of discretion and privacy. But since the court was not very big, we wanted a lot of light and therefore maybe a glass facade everywhere. But then if you have, let's say, a bedroom or a bathroom on this facade, your neighbor might be able to actually look into the glass facade. Unless we have these lamellas where a view from the side is blocked, but you still have actually a whole glass wall to look out. And this is somehow how we developed this facade in the courtyard, and then it all jumped into the front, because we have a similar situation once the neighboring buildings across the street are also built. So in this case, we made a whole plan, let's say degrees of discretion, where we found that certain areas needed to be protected more or less, because maybe there's a bathroom or something behind. And did some studies on how these degrees of discretion would trade into a new map for these patterns. And here you see how it was translated into a facade. So sometimes we have these balcony railings. When you sit down, you have a protection. If you get up, of course, you can look out. This is a view into one of the apartments with these sunken areas to sit down. So here in the courtyard, you see, where it melts together. In this case, there's a bathroom behind. In this case, down here, there's a bedroom. So you don't really see into the spaces, but inside, behind here is a glass wall, so they still have a lot of light coming into the rooms. So this was a theme that wrapped across the whole building, in the back and also in the front. It's something that we would like to develop further in the high-rise project that we saw earlier. That's all aluminum, anodized aluminum, in U-shaped forms. Therefore, we can mount them better, and they have more stability also. Another project I wanted to show you is an office building in Hamburg, Ost-Alster. There's an inner lake in the city of Hamburg, and this one, basically where you are, that would be the lake, and you're looking onto the building with a small, let's say, public park in front of it. The building stops here, but since the owner offered the city to actually redesign the park, which was quite run down and not really well kept, he was allowed to build one extra floor in exchange of really taking care and maintaining the public park in front of it. Here you see again the park that he designed and constructed. Here's the building, this is the lake here. It's a very, let's say, standard open floor plan where you have a lot of flexibility. In this case, it's an open floor plan where we have certain moments where there's ice, it's moments where you can step into the facade, better protected with a glass wall here, but still there's fresh air, where you can actually step outside of the building to get some fresh air without leaving the building, and then the course the toilets. That's how this relief of the facade actually happens. This is a step outside, we have a view. But the idea of these eyes then translated even into the separation walls, the interior, but also into the concrete facade ceilings that we have here. So the furniture, the structure, the facade all kind of melt into each other, even until we get to the moment of the park, which is a reflection of the facade onto the public space. So this is the view that you have. If the eyes become a special moment within the open floor plan, they become raised platforms, like little picnic areas for lunch breaks in the garden or in the park in front of the building. So there's this kind of nice relationship of the building and the landscape. And building that we just finished in terms of concrete structure, it's not all done yet. That's a private university in Düsseldorf, our first really built project in Düsseldorf. And it's next to a bridge here which crosses train tracks. So we have two entrances. One is on a higher level, which is kind of a kissing bridge situation here, and then one is a lower level here. And I wanted to show you some of the images of the concrete structure where we have these balconies as part of the fire escape plan. So it's, on one hand, of course, we like them to have more of, let's say, a three-dimensional facade. On the other hand, it saves us the wideness or the dimensions of the fire escapes if we have these platforms where people can, in case of fire, can run out and wait until the fire brigade is coming to pick them up. We have some stairs that also run down, but in this case, regulations became a guiding force for the structural, spatial quality of the building. This is from the street, and this is now finished from. There's only part of it on the screen. Anyway. Another project that I wanted to show you is, this is exciting because it's our first really big project in Berlin. After we struggled for many years to finally, get into competitions. This is the one we won. It's a shopping mall, which is a shopping mall for actually events. It's more, they call it home of brands and experiences. There will be an indoor skydiving and an indoor surf wave. So you go there actually to spend your day, be active, brands that are kind of related to sports and activities, and then there's a hotel on top of it. We have this elevated train that runs through Berlin, not as high as your metro here in Bangalore, but somehow it's a similar idea. There kind of shops and spaces underneath, but the wave happens on this side, so we have a connection to all the different levels of infrastructure of the city. There's a subway running underneath, which we would like to expose in some areas, or at least reference to. There are normal streets, of course, on this level. So all kinds of, let's say, layered infrastructure in the city become part of the structuring of the building. So you have this energy gap that runs through the building, surf wave here, indoor skydiving here, different kind of restaurants activities, embedded within a cluster of different elements that become shops, experience spaces, and so forth. You see here, it's next to Alexanderplatz. For those of you who know Berlin, this is Alexa, the most successful shopping mall we have. Not so successful in terms of design. But you go through here, they create a little park, little plaza with a small high-rise, and then this whole block is the shopping mall that we're building. Skydiving here, surfing here, atrium, which kind of zigzags your way up with this facade elevation. This would be the place where everybody hangs out at the end. Surfing here with a view, which is our TV tower, the signal. And if you're a tourist, that's the shot that you want to take. Shopping mall. Jump in scale. Now some residential projects. This one is kind of a housing area from the 50s and 60s. This building was bought and had to be replaced with a new building. So this is before, this is after. But we had to follow the guidelines. Same angle of the roof, same dimensions of the square meter. But that's what you can do. We had to sell the car. Yeah, actually, I don't think it's true anymore. I think they were allowed actually 50 centimeters higher because since 1950, whatever, when the building zone was done, all regulations about installations of roofs and ceilings and noise control all can be increased, and it helped us to actually make the roof structure a little bigger, actually a lot bigger, because the regulations now ask you to have 14 meters of insulation. At that point there was no insulation basically. So all of these like small changes are possible, but this is the building now. Inside we have this beautiful sculptural staircase that runs through all 3 levels. On the upper floor you have the view to the garden, which is the south side. Towards the valley you have a beautiful view. So this is the view down to the lake, to the valley. This is where you enter. Up here, which is actually south, is the sun and the private terrace. So the private room is up here. The floor plans, in this case I'm showing some floor plans. This is somehow the central staircase, the kitchen and dining room here with a beautiful view, and the living room with a little kind of private space and library with the garden. Very simple section with this beautiful staircase running through all 3 levels. This is the view from the other side. Private garden here, view down to the city. A more extreme project is this villa which we built a couple of years before that. And this is called Block.Buster because it duplicates a couple of things that it's kind of a name for the technique of the design. The building sits actually on top of the footprint of this building. This was there before. And the client came to us when they were living in this building and said, we need a new house. But we really emotionally are attached to this one because that's where our family was founded, or that's, with every kid we built another room. With more money, we got another whatever extra extension. It was interesting conceptually because it was a collection of all materials that were fancy in the last 20 years, from white marble to dark marble to travertine to black granite and everything. A balcony became a winter garden, became an extra room, a pool became bigger. So it was kind of growing over the years. Our concept was very clear. We said we had to keep anyway a lot of the foundations in the ground. So let's call it family archaeology. You keep the footprint of your house, because we had to keep it anyway, and use that geometry, which was kind of created by the growth of different spaces over the years, and use that by duplicate the old footprint, but then we duplicate that footprint into 2 layers, again 2 privacy layers with a public or semi-public layer in between. So that's how the design was created. We were lucky because the building sits on this piece of land, and that's industrial zone land. If it would sit on the other side, it would be housing land, and therefore we would have to have a pitched roof. The regulations for the housing is kind of pitched roof. For the industrial land, there was no regulation. So just basically on one side of the street makes a big difference. So this is the building. The pool was there, but we kind of redesigned it. 3 levels, 2 privacy levels. This is for the children and the pool. This is for the parents and the guest room and the home office. And this is like all the, let's say, living rooms, kitchens, second kitchen, dining room, and so forth. We created kind of this wide surface that really wraps from the roof all the way down into the ground like a blanket that covers all these kind of maneuvers of extending and rotating into the ground. And there you see how it really melts into the setting. Again, here, the private level. This is also where you have a view. Down here, it's more private with the garden, and this is the parents' level. Maybe somewhere here is a line where all of this is kind of old foundation, and this is kind of a copy of existing with some extensions where they needed more space. A central atrium with 4 rooms around it. One is entrance, living room, library, dining, and kitchen. Always separated by a core that holds the space together, and this is outdoor where all the rooms are kind of around this central atrium. So all these cantilevers happen by taking the footprint and rotating it out from the footprint from the ground level, and therefore you have all these kind of weird 3-dimensional geometries. Some interior shots, lobby, skylight, the view to Marbach, which is famous for its German literature archive across the valley, the pool downstairs, living room. We weren't allowed to take pictures after they moved in. These are pictures a weekend before they moved in. Some furniture were there, which is good to see some scale issues. And I haven't been there since then, so I don't know how they really came back. Okay, now maybe the biggest project we ever did. It's 12 to 14 projects all over Georgia. The were called, based on our letter proposal that I'll show you later, by the government in Georgia, to come and talk to them about a local site in Tbilisi, which was kind of similar, public space, outdoors, with certain cultural programs. We didn't get that project. There was kind of an invited competition. But it was the beginning of a really intense collaboration and conversation on all kinds of, let's say, architectural interventions, where the country was in a really interesting dynamic transformation. And the architectural culture not only was going to cultural projects, but infrastructure like rest stops, border stations, airports, all of that was considered architectural value. Georgia is a very small country. It only has 3.5 million visitors, 3.5 million inhabitants, more or less. It's as big as Bavaria, if that says something to you, I think. It's between the Black Sea, Turkey, Azerbaijan here, and Russia. And it doesn't really have too much industry itself. It becomes more and more important for tourism. It has some steel industry, but mostly it's a transit country, from Azerbaijan to Turkey to the Black Sea. So building now the first highway is a big, important project, and they have already built about 300 kilometers from Tbilisi to here, all the way at the end to Koti, which is the harbor they have in the Black Sea. So all the blue spots that you see here are potential projects of ours, and some of them are already built. We built about 12 different ones. So all of them kind of become one project in itself to show how the transformation of the country really becomes visible also with the architectural projects. And it's not only us, also Benjamin Bertel in the studio built an airport there, Michele Lucchi built a couple of projects, Fuchs has built something. So we were, let's say, one of a small group of international architects invited to help make the change visible. Since now there's a presidential change, most of it is stopped. And that's also not that our projects are kind of over now, but we just got a call last week from the new government to design more rest stops, which is exciting to see that it seems to have a value that beyond just one presidency. So I'm showing you some of the projects. This was the first one. We were asked to design a cafe in a park in Batumi. And it works quite often like that. A company wants to build a pipeline or make some investment. They might be able to do that if they also build something for the general public. In this case, it was a cafe that the company was asked to kind of give or build for the people. It was built. We didn't really know about it, that it was built. But at some point we got involved, and it was exciting to see in which speed they could do something and with what kind of enthusiasm it was incorporated. So you see how it sits in the central plaza. When I was there first, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, none of this was existing. Like, it's all new construction, a University Tower, a Kempinski Hotel, a Hyatt Hotel, tower here. An incredible dynamic to really make the city, this is Batumi on the Black Sea coast, a new hub for all kinds of investments, for tourism, and to show how the country kind of reaches to the best towards Europe. Somebody liked it so much that they applied it to a renovation facade. This is not our design. But when I talked to the president, I said, this is a little strange that you asked us to be involved. That, well, copying is the first sign of appreciation. It's like a fake romance, probably. So that's how I feel it. The second one is just down the street. It's about 15 kilometers away from Batumi, which is the border station between Turkey and Georgia. In this case, it sits here directly on the coast. This is Turkey, this is Georgia. And what impresses me is that the government at that point had a really strong understanding of how architecture along the transit roads through the country become like the signals, or maybe the ones that stay in your mind. That's the memory that you have when you go through Georgia. And in this case, it's the welcoming or goodbye building when you enter the country. It's a tower that has a viewing platform. It's not so much a separation between two countries. There are meeting rooms on top of the checkpoints. You can rent spaces there. It's more like a conference hotel in an airport. It's a place where you can meet. You can rent there. You can do business there. Of course, there's shopping. This is how you enter from the Georgian side. You can swim all the way to the borderline. In Turkey, it's actually very rocky, so it's just not possible to swim anymore. But it's as much as it is a border station, it is also a really, let's say, popular beach in Georgia. This is how it looks in a summer day. And here you have all the meeting rooms. These are the check areas, shopping, viewing platforms. Here again, the meeting rooms that you can rent. I don't know really many countries who are so, let's say, generously saying hello or goodbye to visitors that are entering or leaving the country. This is a view from the meeting rooms onto the Black Sea and the night view of the tower. Another project in Mestia, this is up in the Caucasian Mountains. It's a World Heritage Site, and it's very difficult to get there either by car. Now it takes maybe 6 hours before they make really the screen into about 9 hours, so you can fly. Flying only works in very good weather, because if you go very high up into the mountains, there's this little satellite you have to fly through to go down onto this runway. This is the little airport. This is the airport. This is the runway. And you see here Mestia, all these old stone towers from really ancient times. They're for food storage and also for, let's say, protection in case there were enemies coming through the valley. Little tower here. And again, some relationship to the context where you have all these old stone towers of the World Heritage Site here and our tower for the airport. It's very tiny, it's 250 square meters. It's really maybe one of the smallest airports in the world. The waiting area inside, a view back to the city. A small town hall, which is for weddings and administration work. This is how it looks at night now. At the police station with Gori is one major stop along the new highway from Koti to Tbilisi. Rest stops that they can really now, I think, a prototype for what rest stops can be. The idea was to build rest stops not only where there's a highway, but also in some areas where there will be a highway at some point. But these highways, rest stops, not only offer gas, they also have a supermarket which didn't really exist until 2 or 3 years ago in Georgia. There were no supermarkets. It was just farmers markets and then some very small stores where you get like sweets from the Western products. But it was not really a culture where you could go shopping as we are all used to shop. And there is an arts and crafts market and a small space for local cultural education. So to build these buildings also into areas where at some point the highway would come was a sign for local communities to understand that they're also part of the transformation. They're also part of the future of the country. In this case, these are two rest stops that are just next to the new open highway. Here you see this area for the local food market, the supermarket, a cafe, restaurant with an exhibition space. Again, in beautiful landscape settings. This is the other one on the other side of the street. Well, if this one here, this one is built by Juergen oil company, and it's the same kind of design, but in this case they build it in on-site cast concrete, while the one on the other side is actually run by an Azerbaijan oil company, but built by a Turkish construction company. This is all steel construction with precast concrete elements on top of it. So completely different understanding of how this build is. And we were always in touch with different architects, different, let's say, partners to find certain solutions. And we also learned a lot, in this kind of exchange dialogues. At the opening of this one here, which was quite touching, we were told that they already had 2 couples ask if they could have their wedding parties after the wedding in the restaurant, which shows that, either there are much other spaces around where people actually would like to have their wedding ceremony. So I think it's fantastic to be in such kind of emotional moments of their lives part of the setting, to celebrate their wedding. In Tbilisi we have 2 projects. This is one which is a private villa next to the presidential palace. This one is actually a new building. It's only, again, 4 or 5 years old. That echoes a little bit of German Reichstag in Berlin. This is a private villa, still here with the scaffolding around it. This is a rendering. It's going to be finished in about 2 or 3 months each year, and then we can have serious pictures. This is the inside courtyard with the view to the main cathedral. So you have, again, this network of skeleton-like connections inside the building, kind of a 3-dimensional maze that goes through all the levels. From here you have to view down to the city, which is on the other side, or next to the presidential palace here. The last one I'm showing you from Georgia is in Latika. There was one more plan to build a new city, actually, to build a new harbor. Koti is the important harbor now, but they need a bigger one. And the deepest area, the Black Sea, is a quite flat sea. So to find a spot where it's a little deeper, Latika is the place for it. So it wouldn't mean to dig out too much for it to have bigger boats coming to Georgia. The government had a plan to build this new port and also a city with 500,000 people moving there. There's a lot of pressure of people moving in from China, also from Near East countries, and from the old parts of Georgia, Ossetia, and Abkhazia, which are not part of the Georgian country anymore, which were going to be moved into the country. So there's potential for a new economic zone in Georgia, and to mark the start of this construction, we were asked to make a sign which is kind of pinning down the structure here on the coast, which is this sculpture of the Black Sea. So this is built 150 meters into the Black Sea with this sculpture here. From here you would actually have a view back onto the skyline of the city or out into the sea once there's a boulevard in the harbor. So far there's only a small hotel that was built maybe in the late 80s, 90s. A boulevard and a small town hall. The rest is all marshland. And that's how it stopped. The government changed, the plan to build this new town stopped for a while. It might happen again with the new government if they are interested. But we wanted to create this kind of frozen splash into the water. This is Saakashvili, the old president here, on a site visit, and built this structure that was actually constructed in Turkey, came over by boat, put together on site, and then erected here inside the Black Sea. A view by night, in early morning. And now I'm coming to Metropol Parasol, which somehow brings together a lot of these issues that I'm talking about. The idea of how a community celebrates their everyday life, how an architecture can become a landmark for urban development, can enrich kind of the aura of a city in an international level to attract more tourism, to compete with also other cities in the same country. And also to see how contemporary design culture and digital culture really treats architecture in a different way, that it has consequences, that the tools that we're using as architects are really also be seen in the way we design architecture. So this is Metropol Parasol in the very heart of Seville. It's this undulating roof that sits on 6 stems. People in Seville now call it lacetas, mushrooms of Seville. It sits in the very center of the downtown of Seville, the largest medieval downtown in Europe, as we were told. Oh, this is Expo site from '92. Nothing really happened since then. And the city was excited to finally catch up and jump on board of all the other cities like Barcelona, Valencia, Bilbao. They all kind of became really important design capitals in Spain or even in Europe or the world. Seville saw a chance to do something like this with the central spot in the center of the city, which is here, Metro Parasol and Plaza de la Encarnación. This was designed for the cloister first, then the cloister became bigger, then everything was stripped down, then it became a market. The market became too small for the 20th century development, so they moved it outside of the city, and it became a temporary parking lot for about 30 years. I'm showing you pictures in a second. But it was never really a plaza, it was always an institution, either cloister or market, like a building that became an important, let's say, institution inside the everyday life of Seville. Right. Here you have the Bullfight Ring, this is the cathedral, this is the town hall, this is now Metro Parasol, this is a plaza, one of the very few ones, but again, big trees, objects in the center of the open space. This is how it sits now in the skyline of Seville. It is a roof to create shadow. This was the first idea when we entered the competition. You create an atmosphere, a climate that allows you to sit outside, enjoy the sun, enjoy the public life, but also in a climate that is comfortable. On the ground, we have Roman ruins, which is an archaeology museum. We have some kind of food market with a local, let's say, importance. We have restaurants up here and a skywalk to overlook the city. Less than a year after it opened, they already had 1 million people on top of Metro Parasol. So it really becomes part of the cultural route through the city, and also for the locals. So here can you see how it sits in the very center. This was somehow the founding of Seville in Roman times. So when the city started to actually dig out after the market was taken down, dig out the ground to create a parking garage underground, they stopped after 6 meters because they found all these mosaics, old oil lamps, and also all these kind of other, let's say, really important heritage objects. So the competition after this structure, or this failed construction, asked for how can we keep this window into the history of Seville, how can we think of urban space in the 21st century, and how to make the place somehow a competitive icon with other cities in Spain, so we can show that we are part of the 21st century and not stuck. A lot of Spanish people say, oh, that's probably Africa, it's not even Spain anymore. How can we actually prove that we are, Airbus industry is there, they're producing airplanes there. It's actually a very rich culture, and it can be translated into a contemporary interpretation. So the market which was sitting there before was taken down in the 50s, that part, and became the end point of a bus route. And you see that here, the white spots here, the buses coming in and driving out. The northern part was taken down in the 70s because it became a ruin and the city moved the market outside. This is somehow the city with the city, this was the market. And then this was the parking spot for about 30 years, temporary situation. And it was sad because the whole development around was like all the shops were closed, there was not much going on, and everything north from here was a little shady. Yeah? In the night you wouldn't necessarily would like to walk around. The southern part of the city was well developed, all the shopping, nice restaurants and so forth. So we entered the competition, and shadow and the roof was the first idea, something like a flying carpet that's above that public space. And how to articulate that with like very organic shapes, rectangular solutions. But this one was always the one who looked the most, let's say, natural, or the most, let's say, relaxed one on that spot. And there were some references that were important. One are these old trees on the neighboring plaza, which is somehow a similar situation as we built. It's beautiful undulating stone roofs of the cathedral as another reference point. Or cathedral from the inside as, let's say, a closed, a closed public building versus ours, which is an open democratic cathedral that's open all the way up. The layering of the project is archaeology down here, markets and some restaurants here, the roof as an elevated plaza, then the mushrooms, and the skywalk. The design process was the other way around. It was first defining the geometry of the roof, then trying to see where we can bring the loads into the archaeology, because it could only go in very certain areas into the ground. That's how the form developed, and then we layered all the other disciplines, programs. This is the archaeology museum now downstairs with all these mosaics, the different layers. And what you see here in beige, this is, again, this timber construction with polyurethane that I explained to you earlier in that dining hall. We compared it a couple of times with the city, with engineers, and also now with the contractor, what would be the right way to build it. It could be in steel, it could be in reinforced concrete, wood, timber without coating, with coating. And we wanted to make it so it works, in all different terms, because it wasn't the decision that we made, it was a kind of a very rational research project. Expansion, contraction when it's hot and cold, prefabrication volume, sound pollution during construction, fire behavior, earthquake behavior, all these issues became really important. So step by step, I'm showing you here how we developed it from a very simple, naive model, how to put it together into the very complex issues that we had to deal with the structural engineers. These are the layered woods. They come in 2 meters by 40 meters. You can basically cut out any shape that you like. Besides the timber with the polyurethane coating, there's another, let's say, major step of innovation in the project, which are these joints here. You have steel connections, but the forces are so strong to bring the load from one piece to the other. We had to make a distribution area for the forces that goes much deeper into the timber. So these steel rods, which are 50 centimeters to 1 meter, are actually glued into the wood because they couldn't actually just screw them in, because then the connection wouldn't be as strong. The glue was only developed a couple of years earlier by the Fraunhofer Institute, a German research institution in Germany. So it's a timber glued construction, which is maybe the largest now glued or bonding technology project, and also timber project in the world. Here you see how it's done. It's like this long drills. This is the section, polyurethane, timber, glue, steel. And the glue had to be tested again in terms of fire behavior, and also what does it mean when it gets really hot in Seville? What is the performance temperature of these connections? The rules were that you could go up to 70 degrees. After that, it might be difficult, but there is one possibility to move the temperature again up by 10 degrees. After the joints were glued into the timber, you put the whole thing into a temperature chamber, and you raise it to 80 degrees, and also then the performance temperature goes up by 10 degrees to now we have 80 degrees. You can do that once, that's kind of the limit, but the research says that we are safe at least for the next 100 years of climate change. This is then how the joints were produced, how they put together. Wood comes from Finland, shipped to Munich, shapes developed in Munich with the connections, then shipped to Seville, polyurethane coating outside of Seville, then brought inside, put together. A lot of steel joints. Logistics are really incredible. We work together with Arab engineers and also Finforstmark, who is the timber construction company. A lot of negotiation about how many different joints can you afford. Can you build 40,000 different joints or only 4,000 different joints? Big price range, of course. So the whole, let's say, calculation of the project was the challenging part. The whole basement and archaeology was somehow easy compared to finding out how to really make the structure work. One of the challenges is because you don't have a radial structure like in an umbrella, the forces don't go directly into the ground. We have this grid, so actually the forces go zigzag through the structure into the stems. So we have it, I don't know, ungerichtete, anyway, it's not a directional load structure, it's actually a undirectional load structure, and therefore to calculate the whole group, it took about 3 weeks with the computers 10 years ago. know. Maybe today it might only take about 2 days or something. But once you might have forgotten the dimensions or the direction of the fibers in the wood, you would have to calculate it also again, another 3 weeks waiting. So it was actually a very challenging project out of construction engineers. 2 concrete cores for elevators because of fire and earthquake, but then everything else is a timber construction, and I'm showing you now pictures how it sits within the old city of Citadel. It's this dialogue, I think, that makes it really exciting. How you go through the narrow alleys of Citadel and you enter, and it sits there in front of you, a view from the basement up to the roof. Shadow, again, very important factor. This was maybe the first idea to bring shadow as a material to the side. And it changes during the whole day. The sun moves around it. It casts a shadow down into the elements in different ways. This is maybe around noon where you have a brick. Then later it looks like this with this roof. So it becomes a very dynamic animation of the site itself. This is a view from the sky, so you see quite invisible this grid structure here. From street level, that's again what you see. Market, fresh market, and restaurants, elevated plaza for concerts, cafe, and skywalk. Always a dialogue, of course, with the old architecture around it. This is one of my favorite pictures because it shows, this is a surfboard that we have here. This shows the digital design process that we have. We have this north, south, east, west, orthogonal grid. And inside an organic, invisible envelope, everything is built outside, it's not built. According to talks with the landmark department, go lower here, you can go higher here. Talk to the structural engineers, we need more span height here, we need less weight here. So this whole thing was constantly massaged through all kinds of forces from different disciplines, from different interest groups. So sometimes this envelope that shifts up and down, outside, inside, would cause something like this being inside, which is then a built element, or outside where it becomes unbuilt. So the whole kind of building the volume, this grid inside this invisible envelope, was very helpful because it could stay quite elastic, quite flexible to the very end until at some point we had to freeze the whole process. This is how, if you would have designed as we did in the beginning, a spin which had perforations, we would have to be much more, let's say, we wouldn't be so flexible actually to do all these adaptations that were constantly redesigned or kind of re-evaluated this project that we have here. We are up on the skywalk overlooking the city here, the Alda Tower, which is at the old. There's similar, actually the sister tower is in Marrakesh, and this one also was first a mosque and then turned into a cathedral later. A view from the top across the city, a nice view. Another idea. And now it's becoming interesting because we see how people really start to appropriate it, making it part of the everyday culture of Sevilla. This is a nice view of this project. You can imagine the serious Catholics who are organizing the Semana Santa, which is the Catholic week before Easter, where they carry these floats of Christ and Maria sculptures through the city. They didn't like the parasol project. They thought it was harming the old city culture, it would harm the Semana Santa. Well, the year after it opened, it even made it to the cover of their program. So it couldn't be so bad. Finally, they seem to like it. It also works. These are the floats that are traveling through the city, of course, taking pictures, sending it, so it's communicated already through social media, instantly. These are the sculptures that are carrying it through the city. Concerts, flamenco festivals. Of course, there's a Facebook site where you can be informed. It's very well managed. It also works for certain music videos. This is very cheesy Latino pop. It also works for hip hop, supposedly. Another cheesy Latino pop is the elevator or top of it. the current Miss Spain who competed for Miss Universe. She took a picture, she was photo shooted on top of the park. So soccer public viewing, this was Eurogames 2.5 years ago. Or action movies, there was a shooting on top of it. Mercedes-Benz got very inspired, but I think this is a computer model. It's not our plaza, but I wouldn't know who else would give them an inspiration like this, because BMW liked it, because Jeep liked it, because Volkswagen liked it. Pictures, of course, happen in social media, Instagram pictures, Lonely Planet cover for different cultural festivals, cartoons, conference. It also then years later makes it into high fashion. Of course, there are souvenirs, as you can imagine. Unfortunately, we are not involved with them. But that works pretty well. You know, there are painters on the streets who are interested. Again, festivals, Instagram pictures, official pictures, sports activities, middle-age Gothic festivals, some kind of official weather website. This was last year when the new king was put in throne. I don't know how you call that, but what is it? There was demonstration against that. Felipe on the flippers. So this was always the place where people would actually raise their voice and discuss about what's the future. This was actually the year when it opened in 2011. It was the moment where all Spain, in different cities, discussed what is the future of our culture. They had a very high jobless rate, still have. They had to be thinking of what the country is going through and how it can actually move forward. In Seville, this became the base where the people discussed very peacefully about what they can do in their culture and what they think needs to be changed and what they think needs to be kept. There were sit-ins, there were organized discussions, there were concerts. And here you see the stair going up. This is a perfect place, where people can actually gather and feel their community, and they can, be a voice and raise, discussions. It's also a moment where architecture somehow organizes the program. Usually we get a program as architect that so many floor plans, so many toilets. This is what we need, make a building. In this case, it was actually the building that organized the program. Each of these steps of the carousel became a different function. Like one was the kitchen area, one was the Wi-Fi zone, one was a meeting point for a certain workshop. So they all gave each of the steps a different kind of program or reason. And then also at that time, you were allowed to sit there after all these discussions. The city really made an umbrella for an envelope, for their citizens to discuss about where the culture, where the city, where the future of Spain is going. And I think this is a beautiful way, enveloping the talk, referring back to where the beginning of this talk started, where are the limits and where are the forms, which, the forms and the formalities of our culture and how it actually makes our societies and how that makes an architectural articulation necessary, which we are working on. So thanks again for InCITE, Good Institute, German government, to help us sharing this work here in Bangalore. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you. Yes.
Questions?
Open the floor for questions. Anybody would like to start?
I have one question for that beautiful project. I have to ask you, how many joints actually ended up being necessary to put it together?
40,000. But it could be that actually two in one piece, like an upper one and a lower one. So it might be actually 20 intersections with 40,000 connections.
Looking for a certain kind of seamlessness within themselves. Floor becomes wall, becomes ceiling, there's white color, there's timber. It's very monolith on the time. At the same time, in the context, it is asynchronous, it's not seamless at all. In some sense, it is inserted as an alien or a foreign object, the parasol, the houses within the slope roofs of the community, and so on. So there is this sort of contrast always to the surroundings. And I'm just wondering where the is it always in contrast, or do you see it sort of in some sense interacting more, or it is more as an insert that you want to trigger something different there? And maybe you want to sort of react to that.
I see not so much as contrast, I see it more as enhancing or foregrounding of things that we find. Of course, there's a language that developed, an office language, that developed over the years. But if, we go to Seville, it's the trees and the references that I mentioned. If it's the house, the white building, it's actually a reference to the history of the family. There's always some kind of issue that we need to highlight and overemphasize. And therefore, they become somehow reading devices of the embedded qualities that we see in certain areas. They might look at first hand, as contrast, but they're not meant as contrast. They're meant as elevating the qualities that we find in certain spaces, and therefore they become activators for further development. Usually architects are not allowed to build beautiful areas. This is an exception. Usually we build in new setting grounds or in industrial zones because it's about a more beautiful future. Very rarely, we build in a nice environment, so we always go to the nasty parts of town to make it better. That's the hope of the clients. It's investment, it's kind of a speculation on how improvement could work. So it's about bringing out these qualities that you discover in a certain site, enlarging them and putting them into your place, and therefore creating a certain dynamic that happens also.
Right. I mean, from my impression, each of the sites seems to have different triggers, different points, like the trees here and maybe the slope roof earlier. But the triggers somehow for me seem to be leading to similar end results, more in the iconography, the way that the project is developing. So the projects are more than, they're coming from different directions, but they seem to be converging into the same stream at the end results. So I'm just wondering, going forward, how do you see the office sort of developing? Do you want to do more of similar work, or are you looking at spreading the end result and trying to see the trigger and taking a different direction? How do you see that happening?
Well, I selected projects today that kind of made sense once I showed them, but there's some projects that kind of jump out, like the shopping mall in Juergen, which is not perfect at all. There's no perfect. It's all boxes, and we are for many years now working on a lot of let's say projects that are more, let's say, clusters of things. We designed a temporary museum for Munich, which also was just a step-up project. The one we are doing Karlsruhe, which is kind of a shifted grid. So there are these underlying projects also, but media actually seems to pick up more on the other ones. We can also do very technical.
Okay. Does anyone else any other questions or observations?
It must have been a completely different working process, because what you did, was it also under a certain time limit? You needed to develop a certain speed to do that, and it was more, those projects seem a bit more insular than the project you showed in Germany or now. How this one develops out of this urban old space. How was the experience there? How did those type of projects crystallize there?
Yeah. So the church projects, there are more, let's say, freestanding insular projects. And they have to be built in a very quick way, very fast, short period of time. There's some, let's say, contextual projects. The one in Mestia, which are the town hall and the police station, they are actually a small center of old buildings. The rest usually is, in the countryside, the rest of a border station. And they have to be somehow marking the place with the architecture. It becomes kind of visible, new contemporary piece of architecture for people. But again, it's like every project even there was different. Like sometimes there was a very good exchange and relationship, and sometimes just then a design was built without us knowing, which was the first one. Sometimes it was we were communication, but then the builder does something completely different. Sometimes actually it turned out really, really well. So each one had a different structure behind it, so you can't generalize it at all. But there was a lot of, let's say, interest from the government to make changes happen to improve the life, or to improve let's say, just the normal infrastructure that for us seems to be so normal, which was missing in project. I compared it a little bit to maybe Germany, post-war Germany, where a lot of things just had to be built very quickly, like a bus station or an airport or whatever. It might not always be like high-quality architecture. It wasn't in the 50s in Germany either, and some of them are already gone. But for the moment, they're important to kind of give the country a chance to just function as a normal country.
Well, I also know that you teach a lot, right? So there's a whole bunch of students here, I think, who find it phenomenal attendance. Maybe you want to address them about how your sort of work and teaching and how they come together and how your studios are developing and what you think are the issues there.
Well, right now I'm not teaching, but I did so last year. I usually don't teach designing, I teach thinking, which is, I'm more interested in having certain phenomena that I find interesting or important, and having each student developing their own attitude or agenda. I'm not drawing, what they should design.
You're not like a master class?
No, it's not. It's more like a thinking class. So one example, one issue I was teaching once was about copy culture and the idea of what is the authenticity of the design. We looked into certain phenomena where we saw that people took reference. What is a reference? What is, let's say, a metaphor? What is an appropriation? And what is copying? So it was about the issue of collaborations, authenticity, authorship, all these kind of questions. One other topic I was interested in was the color of beige, because beige seems to be the color of common agreement, and if you look into European or even American cities, all new construction are built in beige. I found the topic in two ways. One was a big article in a German magazine, Der Spiegel, which told us that the color of the universe is actually turquoise, until they found an error in that equation, and they had to correct it to the color of the universe is beige. It's because it cools down from red to blue, I guess, at some point. And the last couple of billion years, it's all beige. That's kind of the source material of our culture. On the other hand, I read something about gated communities in the States, where there's only a very limited color palette of beiges that you're allowed to build to paint your own house, because otherwise you would devalue the neighbor's houses, because if they would sell it and somebody wants to buy it but they don't want to look at it to a yellow building or to a blue building, it might increase the value of the house. So beige is the color that nobody talks about. It seems to be given. It doesn't seem to interrupt anybody. It seems to be something that's kind of natural. It's just there. Color in architecture was always an issue. There was a lot of modernism in the 80s. We had like all this pastel, turquoise and sun colors. But beige seems to be there. Nobody talks about it. It's as successful as an icon. So I was wondering, what is the power of beige? We looked into different relationships of beige and science, beige and age. In Germany, usually old people are dressed in beige. It's the color of, let's say, shopping, high-end shopping. You go to the shopping mall like Paris, it's all beige. You go into, it was beige and what else? So each student or student group became one topic, like beige and science, beige and aging, beige and military was one big issue. Warfare, khaki, safari, all of that. Beige and all of that. And so from researching these topics, we developed an understanding of what that means for architecture. Our architectural program out of the topic can be developed. So I'm guiding students to find their arguments and learning how there's a certain obsession they have, a certain interest, how they can actually step by step make it to their own agenda of architecture.
Anyone else with any questions? I have one last question. You did talk really much about, or I'm curious about how you work at the office with the digital tools. I know the existence in digital space and communication and layering is always fascinating you, and that's where you started from. But how do you use digital technologies in the office? Are they just a tool for you to get done what you're already thinking, or are those influencing in some way the development of the design at the thinking concept stage?
It's a very interesting process. We still draw, we still build models, actually less than I think we should. Of course, everything is also designed in the computer. There's parametric programs, there's of course rendering. There's screen plotting, but there's also cutting out. I see that people who are like so good at computers have a hard time to actually check out, and sometimes it's so much faster to make decisions once you actually have the real sketch model in front of you that you cut, and you actually make decisions what you're going to cut, rather than just like click the button and print it out. So I still think that both is important. I still come from a generation where we were still drawing by hand with I don't know if that's good or bad, but I see that I need sometimes the real physical knowledge to make decisions. But it's everything. I mean, I think using the computer and parametric design possibilities is just another extension, another tool that we can just create the palette that we can use to design.
I'm sure the resolution of all these projects is that about. Any other questions, or should we wind up? So we'll keep the gallery open for another half an hour, 45 minutes. People come in late and go through the exhibition, and to spread the word, we are open 10 to 6 every day for the next 2 weeks. And if you like our Facebook page, InCITE, then you'll get to know what we are doing next. I think we have another 3 or 4 exhibitions lined up for the next 5 months. Very exciting for us. Thank you, Juergen, and thank you everybody for a wonderful evening.